The following video contains spoilers. We suggest watching the episodes alone in the dark. Hey, Wolfpack! We're back, and we're ready to conclude Twilight Zone month with a look back at the underrated 80s reboot once more. Not many people are aware of this reboot, since much of this show's reputation was totally eclipsed by the horrendously infamous 2000s Twilight Zone reboot, and the refreshingly recent Jordan Peele reboot winning some fans over again. However, the 80s Twilight Zone series was not as bad as most reboots were at the time, since it did have its fair share of good tales of suspense on its own resume, and fan appreciation as well. Sadly, this version of the horror anthology classic just did not catch on with audiences, and was mostly forgotten over time. I know very little about the 80s show myself, but I've heard a ton of people enjoyed it, and claimed that it was the only good attempt at bringing back the franchise compared to the other shows. So, what better way to learn more about this hidden gem than doing a review on none other than the Gen 2 reboot's very first episode, Shatterday. Today's story was the starter episode, laying out the new format and tone of Gen 2 Twilight Zone, and it also happens to be a major fan favorite tale for the 80s fanbase. This episode stars A-list celebrity Bruce Willis before he got famous. The narrative was actually based off of a short story by one of the greatest horror writers to ever live, Harlan Ellison, who made I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and at least a few episodes from numerous other horror shows and sci-fi dramas. And best of all, this Twilight Zone pilot was directed by none other than one of the masters of horror, Wes Craven. Impressive 80s Twilight Zone, very impressive. Though since I do have some mean-spirited comedy on our channel, I'm sure that all the Twilight Zone fans will take my heckling as simple good fun, and not be too mad at me for some wacky jabs at this classic, right? Right?
Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. Hate!
Let's get this over with. So yeah, this episode has an amazing all-star ensemble who would be absolutely perfect at making a Twilight Zone story. But was it really as good as people have built it up to be? Was this new beginning indeed a ray of hope shining down upon us casual viewers? Is Shatterday still a brilliant cautionary tale by today, or has it aged as horribly as the Maple Street remake? Well, that's what we intend to find out. So take a good look in your mirror, folks, because this episode is going to lecture us on knowing if what you see is truly what you are. This is my review on the 80s Twilight Zone's very first epic adventure, Shatterday. So, our episode opens up with a mirror showing us Bruce Willis shattering to a million pieces. Probably because someone saw Willis's last horrible Die Hard sequel. But we then get my favorite part of this whole episode, the dramatic flute music. Yes, you heard that right. Dramatic flute music. This episode has a dramatic flute. This episode frequently utilizes a dramatic flute all throughout this whole plot. It's a tad weird, but I kind of like it, because of how bizarre it is. So bizarre that it adds a unique, ominous flavor to this supernatural story, so I approve. It's silly but quite unique. We soon meet our main character, Peter J. Novins, a public relations advertising agent who is drinking his sorrows away at a bar. And yes, he is played by a very young Bruce Willis. For those of you who don't know, all versions of The Twilight Zone actually had some huge celebrities and guest stars featured in their horror episodes, before they became household name famous. Bruce Willis was in this because he wasn't made into the huge celebrity he is now, due to this show being created before his Die Hard movie made him famous. Some celebrities we know and love by today actually got their start in low-budget horror stories before their careers took off, with Bruce Willis being one such example. I got to admit, it is kind of funny how we keep getting these huge guest stars on these goofy horror stories, since we get to see them demonstrate their talents, or lack thereof, before they grew up into the big Hollywood stars they are now. You gotta admit, this does kind of grant us some fun, interesting moments here, seeing these big-wig celebrities on these campy horror stories in their younger days, because it's just so entertaining to watch. That's why we're called Wolf Entertainment. Ba-da-bop-ba-da-bop. As you can guess, Bruce Willis naturally does a great job in his role, since, well, he's Bruce Willis, and that guy rarely does anything wrong. Heck, he even made the G.I. Joe sequel more tolerable whenever he was on screen. So he manages to carry the episode very well with his gripping performance. Anyways, what's his character Peter like? Well, as usual in the Twilight Zone, the narrator gives us his stats card.
Some push for what they need. Some push for what they want. Some people like Peter J. Novins just push. If they do it hard enough and long enough, something might just push back from the Twilight Zone.
So, Bruce Willis is drinking at the bar alone because he knows how screwed the Twilight Zone is in the future, where he discusses his boring life with a bartender, who is actually played by the voice actor for Bumblebee on the original Transformers cartoon. Yes, really, that dorky-looking bartender is Bumblebee, kids. Bumblebee is serving drinks to Bruce Willis.
Jamie late again?
Maybe it's crosstown traffic, maybe it's... Johnny, give me the phone, will you? Sure.
It's just a small trivia note, but that is kind of cool. Though I guess it is better that they got him rather than the Transformers Prime Bumblebee. How do you think that would have gone down?
Maybe it's crosstown traffic, maybe it's... Johnny, give me the phone, will you? Johnny, if, Jimmy shows up, I couldn't wait. All right to go. Hey! Can't you see I got a problem here? Can't you see I got a situation here? Can't you just tell her?
But back to the plot. Peter is too drunk to drive, so he uses the bar's phone to call for a ride home, but he accidentally dials his own apartment number, where all of a sudden, somebody answers on the other end of the line, where we see that Peter has called himself. What? He called his own home by mistake, and out of nowhere, a clone of himself answers him. He just has a clone lying around. He has a clone. Huh?
What the hell is going on around here?
Yep, just like that, double Bruce Willis's, with no explanation whatsoever. Wait, is it double Willis's, or will I? Willis's, will I? Willis's, will I? Oh, who cares? There's two of them now. Well, that was an instant drop into the Supernatural Shenanigans reboot. I mean, He just gets a call from himself, and the clone Bruce Willis is nonchalantly mildly amused by this? Yep, I found out that there's two of me, and it's all good, it's all good. Who would even take a call from an alternate clone of yourself so awkwardly okay like this? Oops, sorry, that's for me. Let me get this. Hello? Hello, Catastrophe. This is a message from somebody who knows you. Someone you can relate with. Somebody who could use a feline like you. Depending on how you want to approach this situation, I could either be your best friend or your worst enemy. The choice is yours, but first, I wish for you to hear me out before making that ultimate decision. Consider bargaining with me face to face, or else my associates won't take the rejection very well if you refuse our helping paw. Ha! Nice try, Mrs. Biazovich. I know this is a trick. I'm not going back and giving your Haunting Hour episode a perfect score if you keep prank calling me. It was alright, but not 10 out of 10 good. What? Your episode just wasn't the flawless victory everyone praised it up as. So do what Queen Elsa says, and let it go. You don't understand, sheesh, what a whiner. More like Mrs. Biazza bitch, am I right? So where was I? Oh yeah, Bruce Willis calling himself in his own apartment. The main character demands to know who this really is, but after exchanging a few questions, answers, character tics, and backstory moments, they confirm that they are both indeed Peter J. Novins. They are both Bruce Willis existing in the same world. Oh no, this was all a prequel to Looper! Everyone run before Joseph Gordon-Levitt shows up with his shotgun! Peter tries to rationalize all this craziness and questions his clones some more, but they still confirm that they are one and the same, no tricks. There's just two of them now. How? Well, I don't know. The two Peters come up with some theories about how all of this happened, but it's neither confirmed nor clarified. We never find out how this clone thing started. Was Peter's DNA taken by Umbrella Corps? Did the original Peter asexually reproduce like a cell? Did they time travel like on Looper? Is this second Peter a tether from us? What is he? So, after trying to remain calm for a few seconds, the main Peter panics, runs away, and like a colossal dick, he rudely steals a phone booth from some random ladies to help himself.
Asshole!
Remember back in the old days when we had phone booths, everyone? Now there's some old-fashioned dramatic film setups. You kids today have it so lucky with your mobile iPhones, but we had to use phone booths. Those would always last forever, right?
They have phones in booths now? Finally, I don't have to lug this cell phone around.
So Peter, again, calls his own apartment number to see if the clone was real or if he was just drunk. But surprise, the clone Peter answers again, thus confirming his existence. Or Peter still could be drunk, since he only left the bar a few seconds ago, but whatever. Peter still refuses to accept this as real, but the clone keeps on telling him that, yep, I exist. But the clone politely tells him that it's all good because they can both live together peacefully. However, Peter, for absolutely no reason at all, responds by acting like a dick to his own clone and threatens to toss him out of his house and out of his life forever. What? Seriously? This is how you act towards yourself? You find out that you have a clone who is exactly like you and is shockingly kind-hearted towards you, but rather than just living together and experimenting with teaming up with a second version of yourself, he instead wants the clone gone and to leave his home forever. Why the heck would he do that? If I had a clone of me, I would most likely team up with him so we'd be more powerful together instead of separate. I mean, who turns away a clone who is actually nice and friendly to you? Ugh, it's me again. Hang on. Hello? Hello again, Catastrophe. Perhaps I didn't make my message clear. I'm reaching out to you with a golden opportunity. You could... Sorry, pal, but I'm not buying. I'm not interested in your new vacuum or gutters or volcano insurance or whatever. I don't need what you're selling, so please stop calling me. But we can... some salesmen are just the worst. Anyways, the clone Peter calls out the original one for being a massive jerk, disgusted at how they could even be the same person since the barfly is so cruel and icy cold. So the clone Peter offers himself a challenge. He bets the original Peter that he can be a better version of him than he ever was in his whole life. He'll depart his lousy apartment room, but he's actually going to make something of himself. The clone vows to be a better person than the original Peter is, and says that he's not going to be a jerk towards others like him. He'll make a good life. So naturally, the original Bruce Willis cries like a wuss and says that he's locking himself away from the world so the clone can't ever come back to his apartment. But the clone doesn't care because he can let things go. And this becomes the rest of the plot, everyone. The clone departs to make something of his life, while the original Peter cries, whines, locks himself away in his bedroom, and blames everybody but himself for his own life issues when the clone calls him out on his terrible behavior.
What a bitch.
That's most of the episode. Having one Bruce Willis forming an identity, and having the other cry in his bedroom like a 7-year-old. They got the legendary Bruce Willis on a Twilight Zone story, and he proceeds to do very, very boring stuff that just drags on a bit too long. We see the original Peter doing boring activities such as clearing out his bank account, ordering grocery supplies for the next whole year, and stupidly burning away all of his bridges in his life so his clone cannot use them. Wait, what? You moron, why would you do that? By torching away all your connections, all you do is make it harder for you yourself to rely on people too. You just screwed yourself over, idiot. Didn't really think that one out, huh, Willis? So he calls his clone again, so he can gloat and brag to him about how he's the smarter one, he's the better Peter, and the clone will totally fail now that he has nothing. Wait, how did he even get the clone's phone number if the duplicate moved out to start his own new life somewhere on his own? But the clone tells him that he doesn't care, he doesn't need the original Peter's life to fall back on, because he plans to do new things he would never have done before. The clone also reveals that he's been studying how his creation was ever possible, where he came up with some very confusing theories to explain how he came alive.
I think that's what happened to me. I said you were while I was sleeping, baby. And I said I'm me. There's a little piece of me that wandered off. I get along just fine without you. Great theory, man. We tried this one. For the weekend, we went to Kenny's lab and took that trillion photo of my aura. It was my theory. me something.
Astral projection? Aura photos? What the heck are you guys even talking about? That is not how any of this works. That's illogical. You know, Twilight Zone, if you don't have any explanation as to how any of this was possible, then you probably shouldn't draw attention to it, because the theories don't make any sense at all. We get no real answers to any of this, people. It's all just hand-waved aside that the clone formed thanks to Peter's soul splitting apart or something, which doesn't make any sense.
Of course! Don't you know anything about science?
Also, this episode gives all the days of the week these very odd pun titles, such as Someday, Duesday, Woundsday, Free Day, Shatterday, and Whatever Day. But it's never quite elaborated on what any of this means or why this was done. I have no clue why the story gives each day these weird pun titles. Maybe it's explained in Harlan Ellison's book, but the show never delves into it. It's just kind of stupid and pointless because they don't mean anything to anyone who has never read the original book. I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison, I love you, but if the adaptation never explains it for the new viewers, then it's a flawed story.
Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. Hate.
So yeah, tragically one of the weakest elements in this entire episode is that so much is just left unexplained, or worse, hand-waved aside with a nonsensical explanation. I know the Twilight Zone was well known for the magical, supernatural premises, but this episode draws so much attention to the weaker elements holding it back. This story would honestly be fine without the weird pun days of the week or the Peter clones attempting to explore the supernatural phenomena when the story is okay without either part. Well, a lot of you might be asking me, hey Kat, you spent so much time bashing this fan-favorite tale of suspense. Do you have anything nice to say about it? Well, actually, yes I do. Despite my confusion over some minor parts, I can say that the greatest part of this whole story is the central moral. The basic idea behind Shatterday is us self-reflecting on our own identity. We're supposed to understand the main idea of this episode, which is us taking a good look at who we really are. Do you truly know who you are, or do you see a perfect illusion of yourself deluding you? Sometimes we often ignore our flaws or bad habits, but Shatterday does something really deep by informing us to really take a good look at yourselves to see if we actually are good people or bad eggs who take our life for granted. The clone Bruce Willis is essentially Peter's conscience, his good side. The clone Peter is utterly disgusted by how horrible the original one has been all his life, and a big part of why he wants to strike it out on his own to build a whole new life is because he doesn't want to become the loser the original became over time. The original Peter is a selfish prick who thinks he's a good guy, when really he is not. It tells us the differences of being a real good person and a jaded, cynical washout who pushes aside fixing themselves because admitting that we all have things to work on is too hard or too uncomfortable. The original Bruce Willis never admits to his failings as a human being, and just cries, angsts, pities himself, and points the finger at others for causing his life to go to crap. While the clone goes out of his way to fix himself up, admit to his faults, and rebuild what he lost. The clone tells him that he took up his job because he didn't hide in his room like a baby. He works harder at his job than the original ever did. He got a better apartment, and he even mended his broken relationship with their mother. The real Peter subtly implies that he had a falling out with his mom and ditched her so he could chase his own shallow fun, which destroyed their family.
Asshole!
However, the clone Peter reveals that he was able to fix their broken relationship. He didn't lie or run away from his problems. He actually earned back his mom's trust, to the point where she'll be living with him now so he can take care of her the same way she took care of him. The clone did something that most people would never ever do today. He swallowed his pride, admitted to his wrongdoings, and worked on fixing himself up rather than running away from his responsibilities or pointing the fingers on others like the original Peter does. This is pretty much the rest of the story, hammering it in that sometimes we need to fix ourselves and not blame others for our own failings, all through Clone Peter telling off the original one for his bad behavior. This whole story is telling the viewer that self-help is important to uphold, because we need to know who we are instead of lying about who we think we are. It's actually quite satisfying to see whenever the clone calls the original out on how much he sucks. Because as the plot slowly unravels, we also begin to understand that the clone is in fact the good guy. The clone is the one trying to be good. The clone is resolving his life problems, while the original Peter reacts like a baby and does everything he can to ruin his life and dodge all his issues. The main Peter we started out with is revealed to be a selfish, entitled bastard who only looks out for number one, himself, while the clone constantly does good deeds and calls the idiot out for being a monster. The best of these scenes is when he epically tells the original Peter that their mom is his mom now.
Are you out of your bloody mind? How am I going to take care of that old woman in New York? I've got work to do. I've got places to go. I have a life to lead. Not anymore, you don't, you pathetic loser. Maybe you can live with your bad gut feelings about her, but not me. She arrives next week. You're crazy! Yeah. And you just lost your mother. Chew on that one.
So yeah, most of this episode is one long character study on a flawed human being who ruined his life just to seek out selfish desires. And a kind-hearted human being who owns up to his issues and goes out of his way to salvage everything he had ever lost. Honestly, it's a really deep moral that does hold up very strongly by today. Society does have huge problems admitting that they were wrong and hides from responsibility, so it is very astounding that this episode informs people that owning up to our failures is not such a bad idea. So despite my problems with some moments, the story does have a very great message to tell people, which was what made the original Twilight Zone so special in the first place. However, that wasn't enough to cover up all my problems with it. Other than the unexplained cloning stuff, the worst part of this episode is the pacing. Good lord, the narrative drags on for a long time. This episode almost feels longer than it actually is, since we often follow Bruce Willis doing boring, mundane things whenever he's not talking with himself. It just gets so slow. Suffice to say, Mr. Craven didn't exactly bring his Nightmare on Elm Street game to this story. This episode kind of suffers from a classic case of toy train syndrome. It has an incredibly deep, touching storyline, but real serious issues with the speed of the action. It takes some big breaks a little too often, and gets downright repetitive whenever the good clone calls out the original Peter multiple times for being a piece of crap. Like, we get it, the original Peter was a dick in life, and the clone just had to be a decent human being to find happiness. It's a good message to provide, but it just needs some more visual storytelling to complement the excellent theme. I've noticed that in a ton of the 80s Twilight Zone tales, there is a distinct lack of heavy visuals and creative imagery showing off the story's power. The old Twilight Zone had tons of signature scenes showing off how creepy and grim the atmosphere was, but the 80s Twilight Zone rarely ever has these type of effects, and often result in forgettable journeys by not leaving something sticking out in your mind. I know I shouldn't be too hard on this, because it was based on a book, but this was directed by Wes Craven. Wes Craven, one of the masters of horror, designed this story, yet he forgot to include any deeper images to visually show off his story.
Wes Craven!
I know this series had a tight budget, but I've seen many other low-budget horror anthologies that at least tried to give us a creepy image to demonstrate the grander moments of their plots. All this episode really needed was Bruce Willis looking into a mirror or looking at his past self to show us how he or his clone are taking all this madness in. I love what's being said, but the story needs more memorable visuals to add layers to the writer's point. I mean, how cool would it be if the Bruce Will eyes were gazing into mirrors at the exact same time? One of them sees himself for what he is, a flawed human being, and shatters his reflection in anger, while the other Peter sees nothing wrong with himself despite his obvious flaws and hides from who he is. Something similar to that could really emotionally impact the viewers, but the producers just don't do that. I'm sorry, Harlan Ellison, but you should have had a lot more of a say in the directing being done here. We cut to, Duesday, where the original Peter stalks his clone and creepily watches him in his home, where, of course, the dramatic flute returns. I love that bit. The original Peter calls his clone again, where the show reveals that the original Peter has gotten sick and is growing unwell. He tries to work stuff out with the clone, but the duplicate Peter refuses his hand since he knows that the original Peter is vile garbage. The clone has been digging back into their past and calls him out on his bad behavior once more, where we learn that the original Peter was taking bribes from a corrupt company who would have destroyed the city's economy. Yep, Peter was a greedy douche. The original nasty Peter tries to justify this move by saying that he was desperate, he needed the money, what else was I supposed to do? But the clone wisely doesn't buy it and tells him off. He says that he did what he would never have done. He ended the deals with the corrupt company because he has morals. He informs Peter that he should take over as the real Peter now because the original one was such a waste of space, angrily hanging up on him in disgust. Dang, this stuff just got real. As much as I dislike the slow as heck build-up, the episode does do a pretty great job at the drama and heavy-hitting moments. This plot's strongest superpower is all the deep themes showing off why we should fix ourselves instead of pinning all the blame on somebody else or hiding from our issues over confronting them. It's the best frickin' flavor of cleverness ever cooked up. My compliments to the chef. Though, again, my only complaint is the show dragging it out some more. we get another scene like this on Free Day, where we see a sickly Peter lying in bed feeling sorry for himself, when the clone Peter calls him for a change to tell the guy that he got back with one of their old ex-girlfriends. Of course, the original Peter, being the beacon of humanity that he is, had a vicious breakup with her at one point, and the two never spoke again. However, the clone won her back by doing something the original Peter would never do. He apologized to her and admitted that he was wrong. Yep, he just had to say he was sorry, and he scored. It's pretty cheesy by now, but to be honest, I kind of like that moment in the end, since it shows us how sometimes the simplest solutions are sometimes the ones that work. So, Twilight Zone, I'll admit that it was a decent moment here. But you didn't need it to be a few minutes long, especially since it does the same thing as the mother reconciliation scene did. Oh well, it was in the book, and I'll assume that Wes Craven wanted to stay on Mr. Ellison's good side.
Hate!
So, we finally get to our grand conclusion once we reach Shatterday. And at long last, the two Peters finally meet each other face to face for the first and final time. The clone reveals that he came to see the original Peter so he could finally make amends with him, because the clone somehow figured out that the real Peter is dying. Yep, that's what was so important about Peter getting sick on Duesday. The real Peter is dying because he failed to change himself for the better, which resulted in him fading away from existence, while the clone Peter became the better of the two, deserving life.
Okay.
Yeah, don't ask me how or why the original Peter is dying, because it's never fully explained. I'm sure it is through the book, but the show only drops allegories for us to clarify what's going on. You see, the clone Peter tells the dying one that he's becoming a memory. He refused to change himself while the clone moved forward in his life. The clone is taking over since he fixed his issues, thus becoming the real ego in control now. So basically, because the original Peter didn't do anything at all, he fades away and disappears now, because he didn't live his life or move on.
Okay.
I love what you're trying to say, Mr. Ellison, but again, the episode is kind of confusing still, and all it does is show off how the original Peter was an idiot. All he had to do was carry on in his life and take some chances, but for no reason he didn't. I mean, what careless moron would totally miss something so important like that? What is it? Catastrophe. Join us now or else. Not now, Blacksmith Orange. So, I think we, the audience, are supposed to be impressed that there's now two Bruce Willises in the same scene. But honestly, this effect is not as good or fresh by today, since we've seen it done a million times on numerous other TV shows and movies. The same person interacting with a clone of themselves thing has been done so many times by now. We've seen it on Star Trek, Power Rangers, The Addams Family, and heck, even Cinematic Venom was able to edit two versions of himself on his YouTube reviews. So it's not that impressive by today anymore. Not helping matters was that even Back to the Future Part 2 did the two actors acting with themselves moment better than this did.
Marty, you must be extremely careful not to run into your other self. Excuse me, sir. Be a power, hand me a 5/8 inch wrench and a toolbox.
So, yeah, I'm sorry guys, but the double Bruce Willises in the same room did not impress me as much as it did for other people. Though I will admit that the show gave the dying Bruce Willis this really cool growly voice to show off how he's dying.
I remember the archetypes from
Now that is kind of cool. Though, is it me or does Brucey kind of sound similar to the Cenobites?
No, I think I'm in the shadow. That's cute. You don't have to worry about it now. Things going well with Jamie. Bob, super for you. You might want to get some money back. Help with the kid. Yes.
Anyways, this was the main idea behind this episode. Clone Peter only had to improve his life to regain his healthy, happy outlook on the world, while the original Peter allowed his bitterness, selfishness, and hatred to consume him, to the point where it destroyed him. Wow, this was a better remake of Maple Street than the last abomination we covered was. In all seriousness, this is a pretty sad scene that does kind of hit you hard with the excellent lesson they had. The clone asks the dying Peter if he would have ever done anything differently in his life, but he actually says no. Even at the edge of death, the original Peter still saw nothing wrong in his life choices and refuses to admit that he did wrong. He still denies that he was a bad person, which only makes you kind of hate him even more. However, the show still tries to make you feel sad for him since he eventually gives in and decides to hand over full control of his life to his clone. This means absolutely nothing because the clone didn't even need permission from him since he did well on his own. I don't feel that bad for the guy. He sucks. This handshake over how the clone was a better man kind of rings hollow when the clone finally gets the original Peter's approval because he still died being a dick. But that's the end. The original Peter vanishes into thin air like he was snapped out of existence, and the clone lives happily ever after. The clone won the easiest competition ever made, and moves on in his life, literally abandoning his past self behind forever.
Peter J. Novins, both victor and victim of a brief struggle for custody of a man's soul. A man who lost himself and found himself on a lonely battlefield somewhere in the Twilight Zone.
Okay.
And that was the ending to the premiere of the beloved 80s Twilight Zone episode, Shatterday. How does it hold up? Well, much like the Nightmare Room's Dear Diary, I'm Dead, I think it does kind of have a fair share of flaws and isn't as perfect as we remembered it. However, I can safely say that overall, it is still a pretty good story. This episode has some serious issues with the pacing, the drab atmosphere, the lack of cool visuals, and drawing unrequired attention to some minor details, but it's also gifted with great acting, relatable drama, a well-structured narrative, a well-planned character study, and best of all, a deep, powerful message. The greatest trait in this tale is the heavy lesson on how we need to take a good look at ourselves and really think about our own life. It makes one think, is this the best me I can possibly be? How can I improve my life? Am I happy? Am I a good person? Who am I? It's just so thought-provoking, demonstrates the differences between selfishness versus selflessness, and really hits you hard by showing us that we need to admit to our own faults if we ever intend to fix up our own lives. It really does have so much to say when we see the original Bruce Willis pouting in his room, crying like a baby, blaming everyone else for his screw-ups, and severing all ties to people, while the clone does the exact opposite. The clone goes out to see the world, accepts responsibility for his failures, admits that he was wrong, and tries to rebuild his relationships, truly earning back everything he lost, instead of running away. That speaks amazingly larger volumes to people of any given time period and is much more powerful than the outdated political hot topics that the 2000s Twilight Zone had. It was just that awesome. So, in short, the saving grace of this episode, in my personal, humble opinion, is the message. The theme of self-reflection in this story is outstanding and holds up super strongly by today. It managed to get a moral that feels straight out of the Rod Serling era and is very important for anyone of any age to learn about. So congrats, Twilight Zone. Fantastic writing here. However, as I said, it was not perfect. This episode did have some moments that got too repetitive and could have very easily been trimmed out entirely, but it still managed to have something important to say to the viewers, so it wasn't a lost cause at all. Although this is far from being my favorite episode ever, I can at least take note from what the good clone does, and admit that there is nothing wrong in loving it, despite my personal opinions. Shatterday's greatest weaknesses are the drab, boring moments, slow pacing, and lack of an unforgettable atmosphere, but it does make up for that with its deeper intelligence and wake-up call to action. So, I grant this 80s horror adventure a gold skull. I won't deny that there is still a great story here, but I will acknowledge that there is room for improvement. I will recommend watching it, but also warn you that it is far from being the greatest adventure from the Twilight Zone ever. This episode is an experience that shows us the ugly side of humanity, but also gives small pointers on how to brighten up those negative moments in our darkest hours. It has a well-meaning message that is certainly relevant by today, so I can confess that it was decent overall. In the end, Shatterday is a very unique tale, with some confusing moments and glaring weaknesses, but by the end, it has a phenomenal message to say that definitely shatters our expectations. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe, or just tune in for more videos posted here on Wolf Entertainment. Thanks for watching Twilight Zone Month, Wolfpack. I'm your catty host, Catastrophe, and I'm... I'm going to be heading outside to enjoy life without my obnoxious electronics bothering me. See you all next time, and happy Thanksgiving. Still no response. Perhaps this was all a waste of time. So many weeks we've prepared, and yet still no results. Maybe we should give up on this pointless pursuit in order to move on to greater achievements.
What's up, Mr. Bossman Cat, sir?
Oh, hello, Dr. Pink. I'm just pondering on our recent experiment. This catastrophe is proving highly difficult to get a hold of.
Ooh, you mean the horror kitty? He's so much fun. I had a blast doing all those cameos on his wacky review videos. Especially that hereditary play from Mr. Orange Smith Black's B-Day.
What? Pinky, you mean you've had contact with this cat?
Sure, I've been telling you that for months. You really don't read my drawings, do you?
Why haven't you brought him to us yet? Why haven't you told the council?
I I don't need to explain my molecular quasi-hababababaloo tests. I'm a doctor, not a gossip Gertie. My assistant Gummy was supposed to fax you. Right, Gummy? That's it! You're so fired, Gummy! Your help is a crock! A crock of shit!
Pinky, this is serious. You've made a connection with this cat. A connection we've been needing for a long time now. You truly believe that he's your friend?
Of course! We've only been doing skits for half a year now. We're besties!
Please, Pinky, it's time we move forward with this plan. This was all your idea. You've requested that we ally ourselves with this mysterious cat, and now you've befriended him. However, we need to move forward. No more games, no more tests, no more observations. The council is demanding results. This is our chance to have him join us. Can you please help us?
Well, I would like my new buddy to play Tea Party with me one day and review some things that I want him to talk about. So I guess so.
A guess is not a yes, Pinky. You told me that yourself. The council needs to know what the plan is, because without Negawolf or Mechanicat, we need to start making our own decisions from now on. Tell me, Doctor, what is your unique decision?
Okie dokie, I'll get him on board, but we do this my way. I know where he lives, so I will bring him to us. Let me show the council that Pinky Dye is one smart cookie.
There was never any doubt in my mind, Dr. Pink.
Tee-hee-hee! Thanks, Catalyst. I'll fetch little Mr. Kitty Cat and bring him into the big kids. You're going to love your new friends, Catastrophe, because we'll be throwing you one hell of a party.